Well, hello, everyone. We are live. This is the academic nurse, Tracy. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I am super excited tonight because we have a special guest. I mentioned last week that I wanted to do a series talking all about all the different things that you can do in nursing. And it is my privilege today to introduce someone who I give introduction really because she is a rock star in her own right. But Dr. Missi Stec is someone that I know personally. We kind of go way back, but she is a rock star midwife. She's doing all the things midwifery, and it is my pleasure to bring her on. So help me welcome Missi.
Hi,
Hi, Missi. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's exciting to get to talk about midwifery. I mean, I could talk about it all day long.
Well, that's good. Well, we probably don't have all day, but I'm sure you have other things to do. But thanks so much for joining. So, why don't I'll let you do the honors. Why don't you tell everyone how we kind of know each other?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, about a million years ago, no, 2008, Vanderbilt launched its DNP program. And funny for me, I was never in the market for a DNP program. I was just gonna like be fine being a master's prepared nurse,
Hmm.
and decided that if Andy was gonna do it, like maybe it was gonna be really good. And so I found myself into the DNP program at Vandy, and that's how we met a million years ago.
That is how we met. But interestingly, we were both there and received our masters at the same time, but we
Yeah,
were
in
in
different
different tracks.
specialties. Right,
Yeah,
right.
because you
So
were in
that makes it hard.
midwifery. Yeah,
Yep.
and I was in acute care, so it made it, we were in different tracks, and so that's what happened there.
Yeah. And it might have been, I think we probably were in one of those big like pharmacology or assessment courses together. But you really only know the people in your track when you're a master's student. It's hard to like branch out and get to know lots of people. But yeah, so both
That's
double
true.
doors from Vanderbilt. So
That's right. That's right. I said that to somebody one day, and they were like, "What's that mean? Is that like a Harry Potter reference?" And I said, "No, I didn't say Dumbledore. I said double
double
door,
door.
which is a whole different thing, but
Right,
whatever."
right.
A whole different thing. Well, I asked you to come on today because I know that that I have this whole thing going with the academic nurse where I'm just trying to get out the word to would be students or current students or faculty or really anyone in nursing who's interested in all the different things that you can do in nursing. So I really wanted to talk to you because one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, what's a nurse midwife? What's the difference between that or a doula, or why would you do that? Can you have a midwife in the hospital? I mean, there's all kinds of questions that I hear all the time. So I would love just to talk to you and find out some things. First, I mean, why do you want to be a nurse?
Huh. I mean, okay, so you know that thing where you say like your mom is always right, and you don't believe that until you're maybe like well into your 20s. Like at some point you
Hmm.
realize, oh my gosh, my mom was right about everything.
Yeah, I've
I
got a
didn't go
teenager. I'm hoping that day comes sooner
to
rather than later.
right. I went to school. I went to undergrad. I have a double major, biology and microbiology, with a whole different life plan. And then I got to school, and life happens when you're 22 or 23, and
Yes, it does.
we plan and God laughs. And um,
Hmm.
ultimately, my mom was like, you should just go back to nursing school. Like, I told you to go to nursing school when you went to college. Like, I'm not sure why you didn't listen, but okay. So, because I had a dual degree in another, like in another subject area, I went to an accelerated nursing program, mostly
Okay.
because at the time I was already a paramedic. So, most people don't know this about me, but I was
I
a
didn't do that
paramedic.
either.
Yep. I was a nationally licensed paramedic, and I was working for the fire department in my small town, and was really interested in emergency medicine. And that was before we had an ENP. I
Hmm.
was really interested in, what happens in the field. And so I started kind of picking up shifts as a paramedic in the ED. So when I went back to be a nurse, I just thought like, I'm going back because I want to work in the emergency room, or I want to because I'm already a paramedic and now I want to be a nurse. I could go to life flight. Like I had a whole different trajectory in mind when I went to nursing school. And then I got to nursing school, and again, like I planned, God laughed. I went to labor and delivery and was like,
That
this
happens
is
a lot.
totally my jam. Like labor and delivery is my jam. So I didn't really know. I was maybe 25 when I got to nursing school and decided that I was going to be a labor and delivery nurse and eventually a midwife. And not at all the trajectory I had planned for myself. But what's interesting for me is now, in all these years I've been in academic nursing, is how many students are inspired by the fact that I was an accelerated nursing student.
Really,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, I just tell people, I say, like, I was, I talk to accelerated students a lot. And I'm like, I was an accelerated nursing student. And they're like, well, look at all you've done. And I'm like, yeah, just because you come to nursing in a not so roundabout way, like I didn't go directly to nursing. I didn't know when I was 18, I wanted to be a nurse. But it worked out. Right. And so I think a
Right.
lot of accelerated students come in, they've got a degree, they've got a lot of a life experience and other things. And they sometimes just need to hear, like, it's all going to work out.
Sure, sure. That's really
Yeah.
fascinating. I was an accelerated nursing student as well.
I
I
mean,
had an undergrad degree in dental hygiene of all things.
some of the best nurses and NPs and doctorally prepared nurses that I know were accelerated students. One of my
Mhm.
favorite colleagues at the University of Cincinnati had a degree in marketing. She was like a business major and then went back into nursing and is an amazing NP. So it's just the craziest thing to me, like how people make it to where they are.
Right, right. Your path doesn't have to be traditional. A path to nursing can mean many things and look different to a lot of different people, and that's okay. That's okay,
Yep.
especially now. Certainly
Right.
okay,
Right.
for sure. Well, what took you from you said you were talking about having an interest in being an L&D, and you mentioned that you already kind of knew that you wanted to be a nurse midwife. Like, how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so we do a lot of jobs when we're like trying to get by. I used to tell people that like if I didn't work, I didn't eat.
Right.
So in order for me to go to school and be on the path that I was on, I had to work. And so when I got to nursing school, I found a job, a practice, an OBGYN practice that was looking for medical assistants. And I was like, well,
Mhm.
I certainly have those skills, right? I've been a paramedic. Like I can start IVs, I can do assessments, I can take vital signs all day.
Right.
So I started working for this OB office thinking like, it's going to be good, right? Nursing school, working in the OB office. And there were some
Natural
amazing
path.
midwives there. Yes, there were
Yeah.
amazing midwives there. And I kind of just got a really good sense of like the kind of care that they gave women. And I didn't have a good sense of what midwives did because I grew up in a rural area where there weren't a lot of midwives. There were a lot of lay midwives, but there weren't midwives who were certified nurse midwives. And so the idea of like, oh, I could be a midwife. I can see patients in the office. I can go to the hospital and work in the intrapartum setting. I can take care of teenagers who need birth control. And I just started thinking like, well, this is probably it. Like, this is probably what I want to do.
And it's
And
interesting too that you just said that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I
it's
think
okay.
a lot of people don't understand the full scope of what a midwife does. So, after you finish this thought, I want you to kind of jump into that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind. So I was at Ohio State and I hadn't declared my specialty to be midwifery. And they said, well, we're not going to let you go into the midwifery program at Ohio State. So I was just devastated. I'm like, I'm going to have to change schools. Like, I have no idea what to do. So I worked for a year in labor and delivery and I had about like, I don't know what, a third of a master's degree. And I just started applying to midwifery schools and I landed at Vanderbilt. I had three choices. It was Columbia, Yale, or Vandy. Um, honestly, I picked because of the weather. Crazy. Like, you're either going to be in New Haven, you're going to be in New York City, or you're going to be in Nashville. Like, where do you want to spend your winter?
Uh, yeah.
Also, I knew that Vandy had a good reputation. So, I
Hmm.
mean, I could have gotten a midwifery degree from Ohio State, but they didn't have space for me. So,
Oh,
transferred
wow.
to Vanderbilt, they were super excited to have me, and sort of the rest is history.
Hmm. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, I'm certainly glad that fate intervened because we never would have met.
That's right. I mean, it's crazy watching our classmates across the country. Like, I think you could
Right?
interview all of them because everybody does something different.
Yeah.
And
I've
it's
got
such
a
a good
plan.
collective. It's such a good collective body of knowledge, right?
It really is, and everyone's done such vastly different things, but super valuable things in nursing, which is what I love about
Right.
nursing. One of the things that there's just so many opportunities, so many things that you can do. Really, our only limiting factor is ourselves.
That's exactly right. You can reinvent yourself 1,000
Hmm.
times over as a nurse.
Right. And now there's this whole genre of influencer nursing. That's a whole new thing. Like I don't know if you've been on YouTube and looked at it, but it is just amazing. Like all the people and they're bringing their knowledge. It's just amazing. I'm so impressed by what these nurses are doing every day,
It's
for
great
sure.
though. The visibility I think is so good. And
Hmm.
you know, I used to think that there's such like this Pollyanna thing about nursing, like, oh, I just want to take care of people. And then
Yeah.
you're like, but there's a million things to do.
Hmm.
I have some nurses that I mentor, and they ask me questions all the time, and they do all kinds of different things, and they just really want to know that like their trajectory isn't stuck where they think it is. Like they need to learn to think outside of the box, which I think you and I have
Right.
both done in our careers, is really thinking about like, how do you think outside of just like, I go to work, I work 312s on a unit, like what else is out there?
Sure, sure. That you're exactly right. So tell me, or tell the audience, and me, because I'm not a nurse midwife. So tell me what the scope is. Like, what does a nurse midwife do? How is that different from a nurse practitioner? How is
Right.
that different from a labor and delivery nurse? What all do you do?
So I like to talk about midwifery first as like we are specialists in normal care. So we take care of a lot of normal, healthy people. Now, people will argue and they'll say, well, the midwives that I work with do all kinds of high risk, sort of dependent on where you work. But our
Sure.
scope really is we have like 6 major areas that we look at. So we take care of women in the antepartum setting, so during pregnancy, intrapartum, so during birth, wherever that is, whether it's in the hospital, in
Right.
the birth center, at home, postpartum, newborn care. We do newborns through 28 days. That's in our scope, as well as gynecology, both normal and abnormal gynecology, and primary care. So in some settings, you'll go to your midwife in the office if you've got an upper respiratory infection, if you've got an earache, if you've got a
Really?
sore throat. It is absolutely in our scope because, and this is a little dated in terms of language, but taking care of women throughout the lifetime. So we always say like, cradle to grave is what we do as midwives. And so I take care of patients who are menopausal. I take care of patients who are childbearing. I take care of teenagers who need contraception. I work with infertility patients and people who have PCOS. And that's what we do in the office. And then my current role is very exciting because I work as a laborist. And so I go into the hospital for a 12-hour shift, and all I do is deliver babies in my 12 hours, which is like, I get to do this for a job. Like I get to
Right.
come to work and just deliver babies for 12 hours. Like this is really my life.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people think. They think that all midwives do is deliver babies, and we do so much more than that in terms of our scope.
Hmm.
But the patients that I take care of primarily are normal birthing people who have low complications.
Right.
And we are providers. So I
Hmm.
sit in my facility right next to my physician counterparts who are managing complex labor or complex patients.
Hmm.
So I have the same kinds of credentials and privileging. Actually, in my facility now, I have more privileges than other nurse practitioners because I admit and I do labor. A lot of
Hmm.
NPs, depending on where you work, don't have admitting privileges. So to have it, privileges to admit your patients, it's kind of a big deal.
It
Um,
definitely is a big deal. As an NP who has admitted patients admit in both types of facilities, I can tell you it's a very big deal.
yeah, it's a big deal. Now you also see that like there are midwives who don't deliver in hospitals. There are amazing freestanding birth centers all over the country, and there are a lot of
Mhm.
certified nurse midwives who run home birth practices. Home birth is really on the rise. And so you'll see certified midwives and certified nurse midwives in home birth practices that are doing amazing. And they
Mhm.
have the same scope as we do. We're the only thing that midwifery is limited by is the scope of practice in your own state. And that's a struggle for NPs and midwives,
Mhm.
anybody, whether they be nurse practitioners, nurse anesthetists, um, certified nurse midwives, any of those advanced practice rules, it's always governed by your state. So if you want really good practice authority, go to a state that's got, an independent, full scope practice authority.
Or go be a trailblazer like our colleague Sharon in Alabama, who just is starting the first midwifery program there at UAB. I'm so incredibly impressed with Dr. Holly. I mean, just some of the work that our classmates again are doing is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, Sharon's done some amazing things, and she's learned things from every place that she's been, and she's taking them to this amazing new program in Alabama. And Alabama doesn't have a program, and they train residents, and it's a really good model to have midwifery and nurse practitioner students training next to residents. So, I mean, another midwife colleague of mine in Kansas, Dr. Kara Busenhart, just worked with their state board to get full practice authority in Kansas. So there are amazing nurses and nurse midwives across the country who are really blazing the trail.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, you have to lead the pack somehow, right?
That's right.
So disruptive innovators, I think is the term, right?
It's our favorite thing to say about our cohort, isn't it?
That is, absolutely. So, I get this question often, and, I can give an answer. It's a very academic, sterile, generic answer. But can you tell us what the difference between a midwife, a certified nurse midwife, a lay midwife, and a doula are? That's the question I get all the time. Well, what's the difference?
Absolutely. So the first part of this has to do with certification.
Okay.
So there are two types of midwives that are licensed by our national board. So there's a National Midwifery Certification Board, AMCB, and they board certify certified nurse midwives and certified midwives. So certified midwives take the same licensing exam. They have the same education. They just don't have a nursing background. So two types of midwives that are governed by this board. Then you have certified professional midwives that are governed by a different board, by NARM. And then you have lay midwives who generally train as apprentice midwives. So they train with another lay midwife. They do a long apprenticeship. So I will say that 99% of the midwives, no matter what their training or their title is, they all have training, sufficient training to provide good, relevant care. So I just want to be, super clear, because there are some areas that all you have is lay midwives, but those lay midwives have delivered 5,000 babies in that community, and they've provided really great care to people in those communities. And but our lay midwives don't have university training like what we would see with like a certified midwife or a certified nurse midwife. CPMs, certified professional midwives, do have a training program, but it's usually not based in a university or a school of nursing or a school of professional studies. It's just not based in what we would consider like a traditional higher ed sort of setting. But another big thing is that like prescriptive privilege doesn't come with anything but being a CM or a CNM. And that is important. Right. Now, our certified professional midwives do have the opportunity to carry some drugs that they can use in the home birth setting, things like Pitocin, things that we need to in case of emergency in a home birth setting. So, and their scope is just a little different. A lot of them don't do gynecology. They don't see patients in the office to do gynecology. They really focus on pregnant people and birthing and postpartum people. But there are some things I think that come along with those roles that just make it different. The ability to like see patients in their own homes and in their own environments, like that is a totally different experience than seeing somebody in an office.
I can't imagine. I can't. I always think about Call the Midwife.
I mean, so a really good example is I had a patient about 6 or 7 months ago who was like, Missy, I just would really love it if you would just come out to the house and just check on me. I don't really want to come in. It was like a day that I had off. I was like, it's not going to hurt anything for me to go and like say, hey. And this is, I feel like a million lifetimes ago. But, when I got there, I was like, gosh, you learn so much about people by how they live and what their environment's like. And does it feel warm and cozy, or is there something stressful happening here? And what are the social determinants that are in that environment that would affect the care that you would give? There's just so many things that I think, gosh, like what part of this am I missing out on by not seeing my patients in their own homes?
Right.
But anyway, so I think the training piece is the piece that people don't necessarily always understand. And then our doula colleagues do not birth. That is not in their scope. Our doula
Mm-hmm.
colleagues are the ones who provide that really great labor support for our patients. So we know based on the literature that continuous support is one of the biggest indicators to positive birth experience. And so when people hire a doula, it's not because their support system isn't good. It's because they want to ensure that they have that person who's going to help them to be successful or help create the birth that they want.
Sure.
And I've worked with some amazing doulas, and some of those doulas are labor and delivery nurses, and some of them are just birth workers and birth advocates, and they really love being with birthing people. And so that's a thing, and I think if sometimes you'll have such a great nurse midwife and somebody who's going to stay with you during labor that you wouldn't necessarily need to have a doula, but it
Mm-hmm.
never hurts. I've not ever been in a situation where I've been like, oh, this patient didn't really need her doula. Like there is
Right.
a ton of positive sort of energy that comes from that role.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've often I didn't answer the question as eloquently as you, so I'm over here taking notes because that's one of the things I get asked quite a bit, kind of in this new role that I'm embarking on, trying to get more information out to the public about the different types of nursing and what we do. So I've surprisingly been asked about that quite a bit, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on as the first person in the series of what do we do as nurses. So thank you so much for that. So tell me, what does it take to become a nurse, a certified nurse midwife? What was your
Right.
educational process like?
So first off, a nursing degree, a BSN, because that's how you get into a master's program, right?
Right.
So the BSN is the important part, or an accelerated degree, whatever that is that you have to get to have the equivalent of a BSN is first to be a certified
Mm-hmm.
nurse midwife. And then most midwifery education programs are 2 years, housed in schools of nursing, colleges of nursing. Some are in colleges of like health related professions.
Sure.
A few across the country, I think, are affiliated with schools of medicine. So it just
Mm-hmm.
depends on where they live, right? But there's about 42 educational programs now in the country. And that number is growing. Sharon's program's opening. They just opened a new program at Georgia College. So that's fun. And for that big state of Georgia, there's a new program in Pennsylvania. So there's just a lot of new programs popping up. So it's, finding the good program, finding what fits for you, and then understanding that, 2 years of education, you're certainly not going to learn everything that I think you need to know, but you'll learn enough to be a good, competent beginning level practitioner, which is the point, right? When you get out of NP school, is
Yes.
to be safe and then to go out into the world and learn everything else.
Right. Right.
So,
It was
so
it.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's really, so, I landed at Vanderbilt. I had a great training experience. My faculty really matched me up with places that I was going to get the best training for my personality, which, is like outgoing and forward thinking, and I want to be busy all the time. And so I was lucky when I landed at Vanderbilt because I had faculty who understood me and my needs as a learner and really were able to provide that for me.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So the next question, you're going to love this. So was it hard?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have to backtrack a few seconds. I hated nursing school.
Mm-hmm.
And hating nursing school for me had not one thing to do with my faculty. But I went to nursing school at a time where you went to class and you sat and you took notes for 1,000,000 hours a day. And I don't learn that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go home every night and figure out a way to learn the material so I could come back and regurgitate it onto a test. But it certainly wasn't by sitting and listening to a faculty member preach at me for 8 hours a day. And you were an accelerated program just like me. There were long days of listening to a lot of lecture and not learning anything. And then I failed my boards the first time.
Oh, did you?
So yes, I took all 265 questions on that dumb test and left there feeling like, well, why did I go to nursing school? I certainly didn't learn anything. I didn't learn enough to pass my boards. And so I hated nursing school. So when I went to midwifery school, I just set out to think like, first off, I got a full-time job in labor and delivery. Yes, I went to school full-time and I worked full-time, but I did not have a husband and I did not have children and I did not have pets and I didn't have any other life stressors except for going to school and going to work. Again, you don't work, you don't eat.
Yes.
So having a full-time job in labor and delivery for me, I could just apply everything I was learning all day long. Like I would learn something in class and then I would go to work and be like, this is what I learned today. Right there, my own like self-made clinical situation.
Right.
So midwifery school, I just vowed to myself that I wasn't going to do it that way. Like I'm not going to sit here and take notes for 8 hours a day. I'm going to listen to what they have to say and I'm going to knit, or I'm just going to do something else that's just going to help me absorb it. And then I'm going to go home and figure out how to learn it.
Right.
So I think, so for students who are listening or aspiring midwives or aspiring NPs, like figure out what you need to do to learn. And when you figure out what you need to do to learn, you will then enjoy the process more.
Right.
It won't be as much of a struggle.
For sure.
So it was super hard. I mean, just like anything that you really want. I was, I graduated from Vandy with a 4.0, and I tell people that I think it's crazy now because I have no idea how I did that, except for that I just, when faculty would say, well, what do you do? And I'd be like, every day I come home from class and I study for 3 hours. That's what I did.
Right.
And so when I tell students that now, they're like, you did what? And I'm like, no, this is what you have to do to be successful. Like you actually have to do the thing. And you have to actually get into the material and you actually have to learn it. It can't just be like a fly by night. I'm going to study 3 hours a week. It doesn't work like that. So I think, you can't be afraid of hard work. It is hard. I think NP school was hard. I mean, I thought a doctoral program was hard. None of that really ever came easy to me.
Right.
So.
I kind of had the same type of situation where I was full-time, but I had a child and, I had other things going on too. So I had life situations going on, but school is hard. School is hard. It is not easy. And I don't say that to be flip, but I really like the change that I'm seeing in education because you're right. When we went to school, we sat in a classroom all day long. And I don't know how we did it. Even being I'm a Gen X, or even being a Gen Xer, I still didn't sit there and absorb all of that. I still had to go home and reteach myself. But now things are changing. Things are changing the way that materials are being delivered. And I think that we are, at least my goal, what I'm doing, my goal is to make sure that we're being more appreciative and understanding of students and trying to meet them where they are. I don't know if you felt like that, but like when I was in school, I felt like it was kind of like, you know what, you figure that out. Your life is your life. You have a job to do here, and that the rest we just don't care about. But it's not like that now.
No, and I've spent a lot of years in academic nursing as well as being a nurse midwife and working clinically. And so my goal has always been to not replicate my experience for everyone else. So I've gotten really big into like, how do I differentiate my materials? How do I do alternative assessment? How do I meet students where they are in terms of their learning? And so those are all big concepts. And I think there are still students out there who just want me to lecture all the time, which I can listen to my own voice if you really want me to. But let me give you this in a million ways, right?
Right.
So, but I mean, I do think that there are a lot of options now. And I think students just need to lean into those options for learning, because I give my students 4 or 5 different ways to learn one thing. And so when I do that, my intention is find the one way. Which one of these 5 ways works for you? And use that way. You don't have to use all of the ways. So, I mean, it's all pretty interesting. But yes, education has definitely changed since you and I were in accelerated nursing programs, and how we do it. It is very encouraging. But you have to recognize what your life looks like. Kids, partners, jobs, parents, family stress, lack of social support. I mean, there's a million things that could make it really hard for you to do something.
And like you said, you have to work, you have to eat. And especially in this economy, I mean, it's almost impossible. I'm sorry, I keep getting this strange, like it's the afternoon. So I'm getting this weird, like I keep getting, you see these stripes?
You
Like, I
do
don't
look a
normally
little
look like
striped.
that.
I know. I had to close my blinds beforehand, or I would have been striped as well.
Yeah, and mine are closed, which is why I'm trying to figure out how the heck that's
How the
happening.
light's
But
coming in.
I know it's like, okay, I've got to
There you
figure out
go.
where to
Sit back a little
there we
bit.
go.
You got it.
There we go. That's good. That's good. I'm just way back here, but that's okay. Um, so anyway, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that the students now have a whole different, I mean, things are so different than they were 17, 18 years ago, whatever it was now. Not that I'm counting, because that would have meant I was only like 5 years old. And how is that possible? But
Right.
but back in the day, I feel really old saying that now, but back in the day, the prices were what I thought was high at the time, but it's
No.
nothing compared to what students are dealing with now with housing and food and inflation and all of those other insecurities. So I'm really glad to hear you say what you said, because we really are trying to meet students where we are. And do you feel like there's more of a sense of that in midwifery? It kind of has that loving profession kind of reputation?
I mean, we are seen as very empathetic, which is great.
Hmm.
And I think if you go into any kind of a program, whether it be an NP program or a midwifery program, I think you just have to be honest with yourself and honest with whoever your faculty is and say, this is where I am. And
Right.
or ask those questions when you interview, because I didn't tell anybody I worked full time. I also didn't tell when I was getting my doctorate, you'll laugh at this. I was working in an academic institution, and I didn't tell anybody I was working on my doctorate full time and working full time until my last semester. And then I finally went to
Really?
my dean and I said, I really need a workload reduction this semester. She's like, why? And I said, because I'm finishing my doctoral program. She goes, you mean you're starting it? I said, no, I'm finishing it.
No. I'm
And I need
almost
to
done.
finish my project and I need a workload reduction. She's like, you are finishing a doctorate and you didn't even tell anybody. And I was like, maybe not.
Sorry about that.
I
Yeah.
sometimes I just don't want to be judged about what my decisions are.
Yeah.
But other times I'm just like, the transparency for me sometimes causes more headache than it does me just, putting my head down and managing. But if you're going to go into midwifery, I think finding the right program is important, and finding the faculty who are going to help you be successful is important. And, there are lots of programs who are all fully distanced. If you can't move from where you live, find one of those programs. So
What should a student look for in a program, but other than distance? And what should a student, how do they know if it's a good match or fit for them?
I think honestly, I know this is going to sound super cliche, but I like to first look at what are the mission and the vision and the values of the school you're going to.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. Another thing is cost. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I had no idea how I was going to pay to go to Vanderbilt. And then I got an amazing grant. Literally, it was like I started school and I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to pay for this.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 weeks after we started school with our masters, I got, an NFLP loan, and it paid all my tuition.
Did too.
And I was like, that was just, I have $100,000 in Vanderbilt education that I paid about $10,000 total for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that was a lifesaver, but cost is important, because if you don't want to be in debt, go to a state school. There are great midwifery programs at state schools that are not expensive. Also, do you want to get a master's degree or do you want to get a doctorate? A lot of midwifery programs have gone to doctoral degrees, and honestly, I don't think every student needs to be a doctoral student. I think that there is a lot of value in being master's prepared, and you can be a great nurse midwife without a doctoral degree. So I think those are big ones. The other thing too is I think it's important to really like your faculty. So whoever you get to interview with, what's the sense that you get? I have a very strong gut instinct about people when I meet them. And so whatever your intuition thing is, right? When you meet somebody, does it feel good to you? Or do you have more questions? And if you have more questions, ask them, because you won't ever get the answer if you don't ask them. And if they don't want to answer them, then that's not the right school.
Yeah. That's a great point. I actually did a video on how to pick a program, or the difference between getting an MSN and a DNP. And I think a lot of students don't spend enough time really considering that. And also, what's that fit like? There are some programs that may or may not interview, and there are some programs even when they do interview, it's very it's a very fast pace, and I don't know that you get that individual interview that I think is certainly
Yeah.
necessary.
And if you want to go to a school and just blend in and someplace that there's a lot of people, then do that. But if you want to
Right.
go to school and be someplace where your faculty is going to know you and they're going to, I mean, there were only 13 girls in my midwifery class and they knew us. They got to know
Hmm.
us. Like, I think that, that also is a lot about who you are and what your personality looks like too, right?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, tell us what a typical day is like for you in midwifery. Like, what do you do? What do you do all day? Walk me through a day at work.
So, yeah. So up until, well, I guess just recently, I had two jobs in midwifery. So one of them was in a midwifery education program, teaching all of the specialty courses for midwifery. And so I spent a good part of my day, answering email, grading papers, preparing content, just getting things generally, ready for my students. And so, being an academic faculty member is sometimes a super thankless job, right? You do tons of work on the back end, and the students don't see all the things you're doing. And
Hmm.
I tease that it's a 24/7 commitment because it really is. Like,
It is.
you might have an emergency with one of your students in clinical, or you might have a test that
Hmm.
you need to write, or there's just a million demands that go along with that.
Hmm.
So I think that people think like, oh, when I retire or when I'm ready to stop being an NP or a midwife, I'm going to go into academia. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the hardest job I've ever had. Don't do
Yeah,
that to yourself.
that's a negative
Um,
ghostwriter. One of my
yeah,
favorite things when people ask me, like, what do you
yeah.
do on the break? I'm like, I'm sorry, the what?
The what? I know
They're like,
somebody
what's
said that to me the other
that?
day. They're like, well, we don't have classes this week, so I'm going to go on vacation, even though it's not really a break. And I was like, yeah, that's right. That sounds right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's about
You
right.
don't really get a break. You don't really get a weekend. It really, I
Hmm.
think I made like a ton of very intentional effort to spend time with my children, but also
Hmm.
it still took time away from my children and my partner and those things, you know.
Yeah.
But my clinical job is, I go in to the hospital. I get report in the evenings, and then I usually have, 2, 3, 4 patients to take care of for my 12-hour shifts. Sometimes it's just labor management. The other night I literally like checked in on my patients and didn't do anything till 4 a.m, where I had 2 babies deliver in 24 minutes, and I was like, okay. But it's, there are lots of midwives on the unit where I work now. So there are midwives that are in the teaching team that deal with like our residents and our med students. There are midwives like me
Hmm.
on the non-teaching team who sort of take some of the load of the more normal patients off of the resident load. We have a midwife who runs triage 24/7. We have a midwife that rounds. So we have a rounding midwife or a floor midwife, like 16 hours out of each day. So at any given time where I am, there are like 4 or 5 midwives wandering around, which is awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and
Wow.
we all have different roles, like while we're there. And so
Hmm.
I just right now have a primary role, which is really labor management and birth and early postpartum management.
Wow. That's amazing. So
I know.
what's what's like, how many babies is two a normal kind of like,
I
how
mean, there
busy
are
is your
days I go in
census?
and I don't deliver any. I'm just like what I call labor sitting, which means you've got somebody in labor and you're literally like just watching them be in labor for however many hours.
Hmm.
But there have been days where I've delivered 4. We're in a really busy facility, so it kind of ebbs and flows. But I've heard we're really going to be in for it in July and August. I'm not sure what happened. 40 weeks
Let's count
in the
back.
past, right?
What was
Um,
that?
Generally we can say like, oh, was there a big storm or
Right,
was it
right.
New
We
Year's
always
or
call
what
them
was it?
hurricane babies or New Year's or,
Yes,
whatever.
yes.
So, yeah.
So, but every day is a little different. Some
Hmm.
days I'm super busy and admitting a ton of patients, and then other days are a little bit more chill. But I think you have that ebb and flow with anything that you do. It makes it a little exciting too, because it's not always the same thing.
Right, for sure.
So,
Well, that's
yeah.
exciting. That's exciting. What do you like? What do you love the most? And what is maybe your least favorite part about being a midwife?
All right. So my least
Hey, I
favorite.
can do
So
that.
this is going to sound super bad because, but every midwife will tell you something different, right? So the
Okay, right.
reason I took the clinical job that I have now is because I really don't like being in the office.
Mhm.
I like being in the office when I have 30 minutes to spend with every single patient, which means you only see 15 or 16 patients a day, not very many.
Mhm.
But in every clinical situation that I've been in, I've seen 25 or 30 patients in a day.
When do you
And when
chart?
you're a midwife, I just want to be personally connected to people. One of the best practices that I worked in was in Lexington. I loved it so much. And had I been in a place to take a full-time midwifery job, then I would have definitely taken it with this practice in Lexington because I did love it so much. But I saw 28 patients every clinic shift. And
Wow.
I talk fast and I'm super outgoing, which is beneficial when it comes to only having a 15-minute slot. But I would like to have a 30-minute slot with some people.
Right.
And so the stress, the strain of being in an office situation where you are really rushing all day, like you sit down at the end of the day and you're like, what just happened to my day? Like it was
Mhm.
crazy. Um, I don't like that. So
Mhm.
my ideal, I would have not left the office if ideally I could have just seen like 12 or 15 patients in a day. But so that's my least favorite. I have two favorite things that I love to birth babies. It's the reason I went to midwifery school. I love the looks on parents' faces when they see their babies for the first time. I love empowering women to have the birth that they want to have, whatever that birth looks like. It's not about me, it's about them and their expectations and meeting those expectations and just being present for women. So
Mhm.
those are big ones for me. But I have a couple side hustles that also make me wildly happy.
Yeah,
Um,
I want to talk to you about those in just a second after
yeah,
we answer the second part of this, but for sure,
yes.
I did some intel.
Okay. So, there are some things that I have learned in 18 years that I don't ever want to do again. And there are things that I'm like, oh, yeah, I really enjoy this and I could continue to do this for another 10 years.
Mhm.
It's just learning about yourself and learning about your limits and learning about how to manifest the life that you really want.
Mhm.
And, that's kind of what's happened over these last many, many moons.
Yeah. One of my favorite YouTubers, I have this secret obsession where I watch, millennials and Gen Z on YouTube. But one of my favorites is Catherine Manning, and she says, "Create a life you love." So I always think that it's just such a cool thing, and I'm so glad she's doing it. You know, what would have been 20 years ago for me.
Yeah. It's
So
it's the idea too that you're always only one decision away from a completely different life.
that's
And
true.
you have to know who you are. And I think
Hmm.
I didn't know who I was when I was 18 and going to college. I didn't even really know who I was when I was 25. I got out of midwifery school when I was 29 and I'm like, maybe I kind of know a little bit about myself. But if I could whisper in the ear of that 29-year-old when she got out of school, now I'd be like, girl, let me tell you.
Right. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you was if you had to give advice to your younger self or to anyone else, what would that advice be?
The first thing is like don't let anybody else tell you who you are.
That's a
Um,
good one.
I
So
think that
true.
there are a lot of people who there are a lot of voices in our heads, and some of them those voices are voices of just things that people have told you about yourself or about that you've just believed about yourself. And I you have to stop that. Like somebody
Yeah.
told me like many, many moons ago, like, well, you're just really not going to be anything. And I believed that. Like I believed that
Mm.
somebody said that about me. And part of it, I think, then led me to just overachieve for many years. And now I'm sort of sitting back going like, I was always enough. And I
Mhm.
didn't have to do all of these things to prove to anybody that I was enough. But like, there is something in the maturity of just learning who you are. And you don't have to know who you are when you're 18 or 22 or 25.
Right.
You can just be you. Um, and that's part of it. Like
And
I
don't
would
be
have
afraid to
liked
change, you know?
no, I would have liked to
Mhm.
told my 30-year-old self, like, hey, don't change because they want you to change.
Mhm.
Like, be you, because when you find your people, they will love you for being you. Like,
Yes.
oh, those
Mhm.
people think you're too much. Well, those aren't your people.
Right.
So you have to just be, I think, authentic to yourself.
Mhm.
And that, I think, spans everything that you need to know sort of about me and about my journey, is just learning to be authentic and to understand the things that drive me and why they drive me. And, hey, like, take it easy on yourself. Like, be gentle. You don't have to
Right,
prove
right.
anything.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something just a minute ago about a side hustle and always being one decision away, right, from the next big thing. So I hope you're not embarrassed by this, because I didn't bring it up that I was going to do this, but I wanted to talk about a couple of your side hustles because I think it's so important that nurses realize we have more options than just, working clinically or working in a college or university. I mean, there are other things out there to do. So I'm going to go ahead and share this right now
All
to the
right.
screen.
Oh, hi. There it is.
Look at that.
I
So what
know.
so a couple of things here. The first thing, tell us about what we're looking at here, Missy.
So, Delivered is the name of my company, and it was designed because I failed my nursing boards.
Mm.
And I never wanted students to feel like a failure, and I never wanted them to feel like there wasn't a personal connection to somebody who could help. And so I've been privately remediating midwifery students who can't pass their boards for about 12 years. And then I actually decided, it's been about 3 years ago now, with my partner, Kara Busenhart, that we were going to do this very formal thing. We were going to, like, launch this website. We were going to launch this learning management system. And we were going to provide a more formalized program for midwifery certification review, because there isn't one. This is the only one in the country.
Oh
Um,
wow. Trailblazing
yeah,
again.
yeah, and Kara and I actually taught the exam prep class for the American College of Nurse Midwives for 10 years. And then we were like, well, gosh, not every student can afford to go to conference. It's expensive. Not everybody can afford to take our workshop. So what can we do? So we have a lot of different tiers of product that we offer, but it was really started out of, like, a heart for students and a heart for people who were like me. Like, hey, I have to pass this board exam to be able to practice this profession that I love. So our goal is to, like, get you past the test.
That's amazing. It's so funny. I don't know if it's funny, but to me it just seems so interesting that so many of us have this life story and this journey where we're doing one thing or we're working towards something where it's going really well, and then wow, the hammer drops, and there's some kind of event that makes us stand back and go, okay, I don't want somebody else to experience that. So what can I do? What can I bring to the table to make sure that I'm helping the next generation of nurses or helping the next generation of nursing faculty? How can we do this to make sure that we are really being helpful to that cohort of people? And I just find it fascinating that usually, and every story that I hear, there is some kind of sentinel event. Something happens.
Yep. And, for me too, it's also this idea that, like, there are reviews out there, but I wanted our review to have a personal touch. So, like, in all of the materials, it's Kara and I. And, when we individually remediate students, they have personal contact with us once a week. And, sometimes they just need to call you and cry or freak out about something or just be angry about the fact that they couldn't pass this test. But it's also the ability for them to have a real life person, a midwife, that is going to be empathetic to their situation and also have a ton of experience in helping people to be successful.
That is so key. The personal touch, I think, is what is missing. There are so many NP reviews out there, as you know, and NCLEX reviews, but there are very few that give that personalized attention. And I think that's what's key, right?
Yeah. Delivered is also, so right now it's just focused on midwifery, but this summer we're going to launch a women's health review. So that will be interesting too, because there are a couple of those that are out there. But again, we're banking on the experience that we've had with personalizing our product, and hoping to bring some women's health NP students in to help them be successful as well.
That's awesome. Well, I've got one other thing that I want to show.
All right.
That's not all you do.
Oh, no, we do. We have a podcast.
So tell me about the podcast. First of all, I happen to know about the podcast because I'm a subscriber. And I happen to know that you have had some great milestones in your podcast. But tell the viewers what your podcast is about. I love the name of it, by the way.
Yeah, so we kind of have a theme, right? We have Delivered as our exam prep company. All of our products are end in ED, so guided, reviewed. So when we were like conceptualizing the podcast, I'm like, what about engaged? Because, engagement means your baby's dropped into the pelvis, right? So we're like, engaged is this super cute, tricky, like midwifery play on words. And so the podcast is free, which we felt like Kara and I felt like we really needed to have something where it was really just a resource for students. They could go and they could listen to us talk about topics, or we had guests. I mean, sometimes we just talk about fun things. We did a favorite things episode at Christmas, like here's great gifts for a midwife or a midwife preceptor. That was really fun. There's an episode where Kira interviews my kids and I interview her kids about like what it's like when your mom's a midwife, which is super fun too.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's also a ton of very academic subjects. There's, a review on PCOS. There's a review on how to treat GBS in pregnancy. So, we're on 4 seasons, which I think that we're somewhere around like 45 episodes now. And probably about 30 or 35 of those are very academic subjects. Like, hey, when you're on a run, when you're on the treadmill, when you're driving to work, when you're on the subway, when you're traveling, like pop the podcast in your ear because you'll probably learn something maybe that will stick with you. It's so funny too, Tracy, because I was talking to a student the other day and she was calling me to tell me that she'd passed her certification exam. And she goes, I heard your voice in my head when I was taking my boards because it was this podcast episode that I listened to about this particular topic. And I heard you telling me it when I was on the test. And I was like, that's so cool. Fantastic. I mean, that's the intention, right? Is that we're able to really help students, like just find a way to study that isn't a traditional way to do it. And there's some really good topics too that are for practicing midwives or people just, we just are getting the next episode that's going to come up in a week or so is called Study Hall. And it's really just about study habits. Like, how do you study? Not just for tests, but like, how do you study in general?
I'll link that out on my channel when it comes out because that's, fits into what I'm doing with academic nurse.
Yeah. So, so the podcast really, what's funny about the podcast is, I said to Kara one day, I think we should podcast. And she was like, okay, I'm in. I mean, it took no convincing. And I'm such a nerd. I like designed our logo. I wrote our music, our lead-in music for our podcast. And podcasting is, because you host a YouTube channel, podcasting is, it's not super difficult. Like you have a computer that's got a speaker and you record your voice and we use Buzzsprout, which charges us like
that's who I use.
Less than $5 a month to produce 3 hours of content a month. And, we put out an episode every 2 weeks, which I think is enough. Right.
Yes.
And you can get our podcast, like usually any place you get your podcast. So Spotify, Apple, it's available on all the platforms, and it's free. And so you might not be interested in all of the episodes, but there might be something there that hits. There's an amazing episode on There's No Place Like Home, and it's all about home birth. And we interview a home birth midwife who I was just so giddy when we were talking to her. I couldn't even stand it. But there's just so many people that you can talk to that just have different perspectives than you.
Right. Well, I have found it very riveting. I binged listened to it on one of my trips back and forth I'm living in one state and, I'm from a different state. So I've had to go back home for things. And I like to download things because I hate to do the car channel surfing thing. I download something, and yours is one that I binged, I think, over the holidays. So yeah, I've really enjoyed your content. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew about it that might come across it on my channel. because I find it so valuable. I think it's such a good resource, whether you are a student, you're considering being a student, or you're practicing. All of those things give you a good reminder. And even me as an ER person, that's where my clinical practice lives. The review on PCOS and some of those other things are super helpful, even though it's not necessarily my area. And I think we need to get away from that so much in nursing. We all work together.
You just said that, Tracy, and now I just had a podcast idea. Like I need to like pull out my handy dandy notepad and write down my idea, because I don't think we've done an episode on like emergency scenarios in, midwifery and pregnancy. Like, what happens if somebody has appendicitis? What happens if somebody has an ectopic pregnancy? What happens if somebody has gallstones? Anyway, that would be it for all of my emergency room people who are like, oh, is she over 20 weeks? She goes to labor and delivery.
Yep.
Right.
That would be me.
Yeah. Or
pregnant
like,
people get sick too,
Yeah.
we deal with them in the ICU. Pregnant people are in the ICU, and they're not in some special maternity ICU. They are in the regular MICU. And like, what are you doing for them? So
that's right. Yeah. I mean, we've had 2 or 3 level 1 traumas with pregnant people in the last like month or so. So I think that's a great topic. So thanks for the little like nudge. I was like, that was fantastic. I should do that.
Nope. Yeah, so. No problem. Well, this has been fantastic. I've been watching for questions. I'll pop this up here and see if anyone has one. But if we don't have any come in, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up? Anything? Any other nuggets?
No, I just think like when you're thinking about expanding from being a nurse, a bedside nurse, or, even if you're only even if you have an associate's degree and you're thinking about what to do, like, understand yourself, know what your goals are. My goals when I was 25 and going to nursing school were not the same goals I had when I got out of midwifery school. And also just understand that life changes. I thought I was going to go to midwifery school and then literally get out and work my 4 years in academic nursing so I could pay back my loan and then go to practice full time. Well, somehow 4 years went to 18 years and I ended up in this big academic thing that now I'm like, oh, by the way, I went to school to be a midwife. Like that is what I really love. And so, things just change all the time, and just don't be afraid to like change it up. I said to somebody literally like an hour ago, like, just because the door closed didn't mean the window didn't open. Right. So you just have to like go with it. And if something doesn't feel right in your career, there's a reason it doesn't feel right. I used to always think when things didn't go the way I wanted them to, that it had to do with me.
Oh my God, you're preaching to me now.
And whatever
are you in my brain?
I know, right? Whatever in the last probably 3 to 4 years, especially in my professional career, when things haven't gone right, I've thought like, what did I do to make it this way? And what I've really had to start thinking is like, what else was in this syrupy stew of things that also caused it to go wrong? I think as women, but also as nurses, we don't do a good job of protecting ourselves and being like, okay, this is not a me issue. This is I don't want you to always like put off blame onto other people. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying like sometimes have to recognize that like it wasn't a thing that you did. It was a product of an environment. It was a product of a culture. You just have to, recognize those things. But if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right.
Right.
So yeah, that's
good advice. Good advice.
Full of it today. Full of good advice. Now if I can get my own children to listen.
If you can figure that one out, then we really have a $1 billion idea. That's beyond like, right? Whatever. Yeah, right. For sure. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give out my email address because I'm super happy to like answer email from people. I use Missi, MISSI.Stec, STEC @gmail.com. And I love to answer questions from people who have, want to talk about midwifery or what does academic nursing look like? I think that's something that we didn't even really touch on, except for how busy and time consuming it is.
Yes.
But how to build an academic career, I've done that. You know, how to start a side hustle, like what does that look like? So, you know, there's all kinds of things. And I mentor people because I want them to have good careers. I want them to build things that make them happy. I want them to be successful and manifest the life that they want. And that's why I do it. It's kind of why I do all the things that I do.
I hear you. Well, I am so thankful that you decided to join me today. I think this is going to be a great inaugural kickoff for this series. And you've been so forthcoming, given us so much information. I took notes. I'm sure the audience took notes. And your email's probably going to be flooded soon. So watch out for that.
I will. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk about it.
Oh, and you're welcome back anytime. And anytime we want to, you know, brainstorm, get some more ideas going, I think we can bounce some stuff off each other. It'd be great.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, thanks, folks, for joining us today. If you have any questions, I have Missi's email right here. I'm trying to point to it.
It is right there. Right. You got it.
All right. There. It's missi.stec@gmail.com if you want to reach out to her. Otherwise, you can find her again on these other areas that I was talking about. I think I just removed it. Let me see. Nope, here they are. So the podcast is the Engaged Midwife podcast, and then her new materials here through her program of Delivered ED Exam Prep. So make sure you look her up in any of those wonderful places. And again, Missi, thanks so much. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, have a great night.
All right, y'all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.